In the late 20th and early 21st centuries, substantial numbers of Muslims immigrated to Western Europe, and by 2010 an estimated 44 million Muslims were living in Europe, which makes up about 6%, including an estimated 19 million in the European Union on a whole, which totaled 3.8%. Now they're projected to make up over 8% by the year 2030. So what will this mean for the future of Europe and the Muslim community at large in the coming decades? Hello everyone, my name is Leroy Kenton and this is FTD Facts. And I'm doing this episode because that was a question I actually had. So this episode I'm going to be exploring 10 surprising and interesting facts about Muslims and Islam in general in Europe. Today, the Muslim majority regions of Europe are Bosnia and Herzegovina, Albania, Kosovo, parts of Macedonia and Montenegro, as well as some Russian regions. The communities consist predominantly of indigenous Europeans of the Muslim faith whose religious traditions date back several hundred years. The transcontinental countries of Turkey, Azerbaijan and Kazakhstan also are Muslim majority countries. But as I mentioned at the beginning of this episode, Muslims are a relatively small minority in Europe. However, in some countries such as France and Sweden, the Muslim population is a little bit higher than other places. This has led to political and social agitation in several countries in Europe. Even more so now because of the millions of asylum seekers in recent years, many of them being Muslims. The Muslim population in Europe has been increasing steadily and will continue to grow in the coming decades. From mid-2010 to mid-2016 alone, the total amount of Muslims in Europe rose more than 1%, from 3.8% to 4.9%, and that's 19.5 million to 25.8 million. And by the year 2050, Europe's Muslim population could be more than double, rising to 11.2% or more, depending on the level of migration that's allowed in Europe. Even if for some reason future migration is permanently stopped, the Muslim population still would rise to an estimated 7.4%. This is due to the relative youth and the high fertility rates of the current Muslims living in Europe. Muslims are much younger and have more children on average than other Europeans. In the year 2016, the median age of Muslims throughout Europe was 30.4, and that's 13 years younger than the median for other Europeans, and that's 43.8 years old. Looking at it in another way, 50% of all European Muslims are under the age of 30, compared with 32% of the non-Muslims in Europe. In addition, the average Muslim woman in Europe is expected to have 2.6 children, a full child more than the average non-Muslim at 1.6 children. Also, one thing to note, between mid-2010 and mid-2016, migration was the biggest factor driving the growth of Muslims in Europe. An estimated 2.5 million Muslims came to Europe for reasons other than asylum seeking, such as for employment or going to school. About 1.3 million more Muslims received or are expected to receive refugee status, allowing them to remain in Europe, and an estimated 250,000 Muslims left the region during this time period. When it comes to natural growth, well, that's the secondary driver when it comes to the growth of the Muslim population. Among European Muslims, there were 2.9 million more births than deaths during this time period. Religious switching is estimated to be a small factor in the Muslim population change, roughly 160,000 more people switching away from Islam than converting to Islam within that same time period. Another thing to note is that views of Muslims vary widely across European countries. The European Monitoring Center on Racism and Xenophobia reports that the Muslim population tends to suffer Islamophobia all over Europe, although the perceptions and views of Muslims may vary. In 2016, the Pew Research Center surveyed 10 nations and found that negative views about Muslims really prevailed in Eastern and Southern Europe. However, the majority of those in the UK, Germany, France and Sweden, as well as the Netherlands, gave Muslims a favorable rating. And one interesting observation is that views about Muslims are tied to ideology. So check this, while 47% of Germans on the political right gave Muslims an unfavorable rating, just 17% of those on the left did the same. When it came to employment, according to the WZB Berlin Social Science Center, it showed that Muslims in Germany, France and the Netherlands, United Kingdom, Belgium, Switzerland, and Muslims generally in Europe have higher levels of unemployment, which is largely due to the lack of language skills as well as a lack of interethnic ethnic, social ties, and in some cases a traditional gender role view where women aren't supposed to work outside of the home, only men do. But that was a very small factor in these countries. Also, discrimination from employers attributed to a small portion of unemployment. And the final thing I want to share is that according to the Pew Research Center in 2018, most Europeans were in favor of restrictions on face covering veils. An estimated 13 out of 15 people favored a ban of face covering veils in Western Europe. As opposed to politicians and intellectuals, people perceive Islamic dress to not represent religious symbols, but to represent ideology in the form of Islamism, which they feel is intended to extend its influence into society and politics. Alright guys, so those were 10 surprising facts about Muslims in Europe. As you can see, there are various views, some very interesting stats there as well, and I'd love to hear your thoughts and comments about anything I shared in this episode, so definitely join in on the conversation. Your thoughts and your opinions really matter. Now in this world, there's so many differences, and oftentimes those differences are used to divide us, so let's continue to learn about each other and make peace a priority. Alright, so to all of you who are still here, here's another episode that I highly recommend you check out. Just tap the annotation that you see on your screen right here. Also, if you want to follow me on social media, I don't know why you wouldn't anyways, but those links are down below in the video description section, so shoot me a message over there and I'll get back to you as quickly as possible. Other than that, just hit that subscribe button and ring that bell to be notified of our daily episodes here on FTD Facts.